Listen, just one more thing.
Hello there. Welcome to my review of episode 3 of season 4 of Columbo, By Dawn's Early Light. First broadcast on the 27th of October 1974 on NBC. The episode was written by Columbo newcomer Howard Burke. Burke was born in 1925 and was a novelist, screenwriter and producer. He wrote for Macmillan and Wife and Mission Impossible, as well as the Gene Hackman film Target, in addition to this episode. He died on the 27th of March 2016. It was directed by another Columbo newcomer, Harvey Hart. Hart was born on the 30th of August 1928 in Toronto. He created over 30 TV shows for Canadian network television before moving to the US. He directed for film and television during his career for Star Trek, the Alfred Hitchcock Hour, and the films The Sweet Ride and Shoot, in addition to this and 3 other Columbo episodes. He died on the 21st of November 1989. He was 61. The episode begins with the camera stalking down an apartment corridor towards the back of a man who we then see is dismantling a shell. He removes the gunpowder and replaces it with C4 before reassembling the shell. He then washes the gunpowder down his sink. This is Colonel Lyle C. Rumford, played by an almost unrecognisable Patrick McGoohan. McGoohan was born on the 19th of March 1928 in New York. However, shortly after he was born, his parents returned to their native island, where Patrick would spend the next 7 years of his life before moving to Sheffield, England. During World War II, he was evacuated to Loughborough, England, before returning to Sheffield after the war. He worked a series of jobs, including stage manager of Sheffield Repertory Theatre, where he would stand in for a sick actor, launching his acting career. He would continue on stage as well as in small film roles for years, before being cast in the leading role on the TV series Danger Man in 1960. He had been put off film after a bad experience under contract with the Rank organisation, and was quite vocal about it, but did shoot some films after Danger Man. He returned to the role of John Drake in Return of Danger Man, but he quit the show shortly after it transitioned to colour for a role that would go on to define his career and that of avant-garde television in The Prisoner, playing the unnamed title character known only as Number 6, and trapped in a mysterious village he is unable to leave, shot in the picturesque Italianate village of Portmeirion in North Wales. He would return to the big screen in such films as Ice Station Zebra, The Man in the Iron Mask, and Scanners, as well as turning his hand to writing and directing. Directing 5 episodes of Columbo, including the 3 others he would go on to appear in, and writing 1. In later years he would appear in Braveheart as the villainous, if not a historical, King Edward I. The judge in Time to Kill, and Kit Walker's dead father in The Phantom. He would also reprise his role as Number 6 in an episode of The Simpsons. He died on the 13th of January 2009. He was 84. Rumford puts on his military cap and an army jacket, then goes to the armoury of the military base he is on, and returns the sabotaged shell to a locked box after he has cleaned his fingerprints off it. He then goes to the artillery gun at the centre of the base and stuffs something into the barrel. He also notices through a window that a cadet is brewing alcohol in his room. The next day at Reveille he is brought coffee by one of the cadets. Rumford reveals himself to be a military man through and through, with high standards for himself and his men. So who exactly is the explosive surprise going to be for? A cadet who didn't tuck his shirt in? Possibly. As he settles in to work in his office, a civilian, William Haynes, enters and lets him know that from next year the Haynes Academy will be a co-ed college, as there are fewer and fewer boys signing up to join his military academy. And at this point it's revealed that it's a military academy for young boys rather than a military base. Haynes is planning to fire Rumford. When that change happens, we may have found our victim and our motive. As part of the Founders' Day celebrations they will be having, Haynes insists on acting as Master of Ceremonies, while Rumford, who was expecting this to happen, makes it clear to Haynes and his listening secretary that he had wanted Captain Loomis or himself to do it, but Haynes insists, signing his own death warrant. At the parade, in full view of the cadets and assembled crowds, Haynes fires the ceremonial gun, which is now blocked and loaded with a C4 filled shell, which blows him up. A pretty horrific public death, which obviously we don't get to see because it's network TV in the 1970s, but still a very nasty way to go for the onlooking members of the public. This is a fairly self-explanatory opening murder that the episode takes us through, stage by stage. It sets Rumford out as a calculating and callous murderer who is clearly a strategic planner, and it will be difficult to prove he was the one who did it with the little amount of evidence left. We cut to Columbo on the scene, picking his way around the bits of shrapnel as the aforementioned Captain Loomis tells a sergeant that the gun was from World War I and this could have happened at any time due to its age and the fact that they fire it every day. A local cop assures Rumford it was just an accident before spotting Columbo, who he and Rumford mistake for a member of the public. Columbo's sergeant, a returning Bruce Kirby as George Kramer, tells Rumford Columbo is the investigating officer, and then Rumford is called away by a cadet, played by Bruce's son, Bruno Kirby, in an early role. Bruno Kirby was born on the 28th of April 1949 in New York. He would have roles in The Godfather Part 2, Modern Romance, This Is Spinal Tap, Good Morning Vietnam, The Freshman, and Donnie Brasco, as well as working with Billy Crystal in When Harry Met Sally and the first City Slickers film. He sadly died of leukemia on the 14th of August 2006. He was only 57. Columbo continues his sweep for evidence and finds a small piece of burnt cloth some distance from the scene of the incident. He then compares it with the shrapnel, also containing some fragments of cloth. He appears to be onto something. It then cuts to Rumford giving a speech to his cadets in an attempt to inspire them and keep them in line. As the chaplain takes over, Columbo approaches Rumford and asks about all the fragments he's found, including a much larger piece of cloth. Rumford says if it was in the gun, it would have caused the explosion, but that it also could have been a simple cleaning rag. Columbo then asks to check whose job it was to clean the cannon. Rumford points the finger towards Cadet Springer, who has some disciplinary issues. Captain Loomis arrives and Rumford tells him he has a discipline problem at the academy and that he had spotted alcohol being brewed by one of the cadets. He just doesn't mention when he happened to see it. As the other cops are preparing to leave, Kramer finds a set of blueprints among Haynes' possessions, which neither he or Columbo is able to understand. Columbo then excuses the officers and goes to see Springer. Springer denies leaving the cloth in the barrel and reveals that, despite his record, cleaning the gun is supposed to be an honour and a privilege, and Rumford gave the order that he should do it. He says he couldn't have possibly left the cloth in the gun, and Columbo suspects that the reason he's so certain is because he didn't clean the gun the night before. Rumford invites Columbo to join him for lunch in the mess hall. Columbo asks him why Springer was given this special duty, and Rumford says it was an attempt to turn him around. Rumford is very sure of himself and makes sure he has an answer for everything. He's clearly attempting to lead Columbo by the nose. Columbo reveals he believes that Springer didn't leave the cloth behind, but that he isn't telling the whole truth. Rumford says regardless of what Columbo thinks, Springer will be disciplined. Loomis arrives and is once again berated by Rumford for not dealing with the alcohol issue. It's pretty clear watching this scene that McGowan is having a lot of fun in this role as this strict disciplinarian who seems to have developed some sort of soft spot for Columbo, presumably because he thinks he's walking all over him. As they leave together, Columbo explains to Rumford that if it wasn't Springer, then somebody may have been deliberately trying to kill Rumford, who should have been the one firing the gun. This is a classic ploy of Columbo's to say what actually happened, but make the suspect believe that he's on completely the wrong track by making it look like the suspect was the target. Rumford won't have any of this, though. Columbo then asks if he's able to stay the night, and Rumford foolishly agrees. Columbo is then able to check some things off his list that have been bothering him, which annoys the local cop. He wakes up at 3 a.m. to check on why the gun was much louder on the day it blew up than it had been in any other time. Then he is rudely awakened himself by a cadet waking the base up just a few hours later. As he's in the washroom, Columbo solves the mystery of the hidden hooch when he notices there's a hiding spot in the ceiling. He then informs Rumford that ballistics has found traces of C4 on the shrapnel, which means it was certainly not an accident. There's an old adage in screenwriting that says show don't tell, meaning it's far more interesting to an audience to show information rather than just have a character say it. What this show does brilliantly is invert this idea by having Columbo tell rather than show, particularly in this episode, which is virtually confined to the military academy throughout. It's a testament to Falk's performance that he's able to do this and keep it interesting. But the purpose of it also drives the story. Rather than show us discovering C4 was used, we see him relay this information to the main suspect, so he and we can see how they react to this information. McGowan also happens to play this reaction brilliantly, managing to remain fully in character as the Colonel while showing just the slightest hint that Columbo finding this out has got to him. Rumford immediately attempts to scare Springer by telling him that he may be charged with murder. It seems as if he's hoping Springer will make a run for it, further implicating him. Columbo then talks to Rumford's secretary while looking at Springer's file, and finds out a little more about Haynes. While Columbo further investigates the blueprints, Loomis informs him that Springer has indeed gone AWOL. Due to an earlier conversation with the cadet, he knows exactly where to look for Springer and finds him in pretty short order. Columbo returns Springer to the academy and confirms to Rumford that he hadn't cleaned the gun the night before the accident. Rumford now has a problem. He is lacking a patsy. There's then an extended scene between the two where Columbo reasons out where he is in the case and what he knows and doesn't know, eventually coming to the conclusion that maybe Haynes was always the intended target. The two then share a quiet moment over cigars, and for the first time Rumford reveals some humanity. almost eliciting sympathy as he reveals that the military is the entirety of his life. This scene really slows everything down, and usually that would be a bad thing, but the two performances are so good, it's a joy to watch. Through very little, we get so much character detail and emotion from McGowan. It's really perfectly pitched. Rumford calls a snap inspection at 3 a.m, still looking for the illicit hooch, and, unable to find it in any of the boys' rooms, finally reaches the same conclusion Columbo did. But when they check, there's nothing in the vents. After he leaves, the cadets brewing the booze, including Springer, are bewildered as to how he didn't find it. Luckily for them, Columbo had removed it, and wants to know everything about it.
I want to know all there is to know about the cider. Who, where, and when.
Rumford receives a call from Loomis, who has now found the alcohol, exactly where it was the night he planted the shell. Rumford demands the culprit comes forward, and Columbo appears amongst the gathered cadets, congratulating him and asking when he first saw it. Rumford claims it was during the day, and Columbo has him. The boys will swear the alcohol was only visible on the night before the explosion, before revelry, and after daybreak, for only a 10-minute window, and it could only have been seen from the gun. Rumford confesses in the face of this evidence and turns himself in.
Done a very nice job. But don't you expect me to be contrite, Lieutenant. It had to be done, and I'd do it again tomorrow.
This is a really interesting episode with some similarities to previous episodes, but also some striking differences. The contained setting in a real military academy that is at times beautifully shot. It's hyper-focused on the relationship between Rumford and Columbo and entirely rests on their performances. There are very few other characters and they are sparsely used. And its conclusion coming entirely from Rumford's character, unable to forget that he saw the alcohol on the night he was preparing the murder, rather than any extraneous reason. In fact, had any other character in the show's run committed this murder, they would have got away with it. Thankfully, McGowan is outstanding. He plays Rumford incredibly still. There's no extraneous movement, very little movement at all. His lips barely move when he speaks, suggesting his complete repression of all emotion. The 95-minute running time is still a bit of an issue, being a little overlong, but there's not really any filler here. Very little humour other than Columbo readjusting to army life, and no scenes that really feel tacked on or out of place. I was never a really big fan of this episode in the past, as I did find it a little dull, but looking at it more closely, I was completely sucked in by the performances. So for me, this is another 4 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.